planning. So what I mean by that is like, we don't do full sprint planning. We get together as a group and we prioritize and talk about what we should be building, what should, like, you know, define the direction of the product, sometimes from scratch. Sometimes I'll be talking with cross-functional partners. So the account management team, sales, support, risk team, everyone's got really good insight. And it's always really, really good to tap into different team members. Sometimes I would be recruiting, interviewing potential design candidates. Sometimes I'd be watching sales calls, account manager calls. They're usually the first touch point to potential customers. And so it's always very, very useful to watch their calls online, which we have sort of like a system set up at our company for us to be able to just to watch past recordings. So those are some of the things. It's, you know, a hodgepodge of all of those in any given day.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Sounds like every day is a little different, so that's great. Kate, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I work in freemium, which is a team that focuses on basically new paid value for Spotify users. And I work on creating like more exciting, better ways for subscribers to enjoy Spotify. I can't go too in depth about what I'm doing exactly, but I do spend a lot of time in the exploratory stages of the design process, which is a lot of fun. And depending on the project and its timeline, sometimes my days are either really meeting heavy or work heavy, but usually it ends up being a mix of both. Like I have a big chunk of my meetings in the morning because a lot of my teammates work in different time zones and we have to catch them before they leave for the day. And those meetings are usually with my product partners like engineers, product managers, other designers, UX writers. And we talk about our priorities, share progress on what we're working on. And I also have ongoing crit sessions with other designers to get feedback on my work as well. And in the afternoon, I just like to have some set focus blocks that I use to do hands-on work. That's when I get to push pixels and craft deliverables. So that's actually my favorite time of the day. I just turn on music and I grind. I just play around on my computer. So yeah, that's a typical day for me.
Awesome, thanks, Kate. I can totally relate. I had my days are very meeting heavy, and then I really look forward to those hours where I can just focus in on my design work. So that's great. Sharon, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So my day-to-day is actually quite different depending on the project I'm on. So prior to the current project I'm on, I was on Walmart in the grocery side. So my day-to-day was a lot more kind of structured because they had a really like structured sprint process there, and I'd get a ticket to work on and I had 2 weeks to do it. And I'd have maybe like 2 or 3 touch points with my lead, and then it goes straight to development. So the work was a lot more siloed, I guess. And then now on my current project, I'm on Marriott Envoy. So the scope of this project is a lot larger. We're trying to understand kind of the new customer segments that are coming in after COVID. So it's a lot more like blue sky ideas and conceptualizing. So I'm working a lot more collaboratively with a lot of the other designers. We have about 4 to 5 hours of meetings a day, just kind of being heads deep in sketch and designing. So yeah, it's pretty different depending on the project and the vertical that I'm in.
That's awesome. Thank you, Sharon. Jennifer, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so at RBC, I'm currently working on around 4 projects. They're all an internal dashboard tool for data visualization. So for my day-to-day, it is very meeting heavy. I talk to a lot of business partners, which are stakeholders. I also talk to my product manager. And right now we're doing handoffs. So I'm communicating a lot with the devs. But yeah, meeting heavy just because I have to flesh out a lot of details with the data, with just QA and everyone. So I would say something that I didn't realize when I went to design is how much presentation skills you might need, and also just kind of grinding out those meetings. And you actually do have a reduced time to do actual design work, which is what I noticed previously in my internships as well. I found that there are a lot more meetings, and I feel like with some bigger companies, you do have to kind of balance that. But right now, for my day-to-day, it's more chilled out a bit, just because I am handing off my projects to the developers, and it's just more about going back and forth and talking about constraints, feasibility, and what we need to change to kind of get the product up and running. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Jen. Alex, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. So similar to what a lot of folks have said, it's definitely a lot more meetings than you might expect. I work at a startup of about 400 folks, and so it's really important that we're making sure that there's visibility into what teams are working on. So a lot of the meetings are there to be able to find those opportunities to collaborate or to find codependencies so that we can work on things together and craft a holistic product. And then about like 40% of my day or my week is on actual design or project work. And so I'm embedded within the health profile assessments team. So working on things related to the new user experience for health assessments within our app, as well as getting folks to re-engage with the health profile is really what I focus on there. And then because it's a startup, there's also opportunities to do stuff that's more like design operations related or stuff that just helps our processes and our scaling in general. So that's something that I really like to do as well.
Thank you, Alex. Lorena, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. Yeah, most of my afternoons end in meetings because of different time zones. So I get a lot of heads down time in the morning, and then I have a chunk of meetings, I guess, in the early afternoons before some heads down time before afternoon meetings. That's kind of how I break it up to 2 focus times. Working on a systems team is very exciting because we have a lot of different support channels to assist internal consumers of our design system, but that also means that day-to-day can be pretty meeting heavy. Projects on the design system team, or maybe specifically ours, aren't that long. We have a release every 6 weeks, so our work is scoped based on what we can get done on the roadmap within that release time. In terms of the day-to-day stuff I've been doing, it varies from designing components, speaking with other designers to understand their pain points with our design system, presenting work in our crits or attending other design crits of product teams, and reviewing work from other people on our team as well.
Great, thanks everyone. So next, I'm interested in learning what was the design recruiting process like for internships, and how does that compare to recruiting during for new grad? If anyone wants to go first, just feel free to unmute yourself.
I can get started for this one. So I was actually searching for co-op positions right before the pandemic started last year. So that was really fun because a lot of roles that I applied for, got emails partway through the process or even before the processes started saying that they were reducing headcount. So probably won't be the same situation that a lot of you are going into right now, but it really showed to me that what's really important is like making connections with folks outside of just, reaching out to recruiters or applying for job postings. And that's something that's the same now when applying for new grad roles, who you know in the industry and like who they could potentially introduce you to, or just even, getting insight into what their teams are like so that if you do get an interview, you are a bit better prepared. That's super useful. And then the other thing that I think is a bit different is once you do have those internships on your resume, it does become a lot easier to kind of get your foot in the door.
Yes, I totally agree with that. Does anyone else want to go next? Have any thoughts? I'm gonna pick someone then. Jennifer, you all have good feedback, so I'm gonna.
Okay. Yeah, just to like bounce off of that, I feel like recruiting was really rough for me just because maybe it was like my biology degree didn't really match most of the roles. But I think nowadays, like it's really common for people with a really different degree applying to product design and UX design roles. So I would say it'll be a lot easier, hopefully. Also, yeah, just during COVID time, a lot of headcount was reduced. Like even when you secured an internship hoping for like full time, it would have been a lot harder just because of COVID. But I see a lot of internships and new grad roles opening up for sure. I would definitely say that getting more internship experience and getting your foot through the door, the first one is always the hardest. But once you kind of rack up that experience and you just get used to interviewing, doing design challenges, you definitely get a hang of it, and just practicing with your peers, it gets a lot easier in a way. It's still challenging because finding a job is just difficult, but I think like once you practice enough, like you will get used to it, and then you will obviously improve.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I really like that. Taking like rejection not as like personally, but a growth opportunity to help you with your future interviews for sure. Awesome. Jason, do you want to go next?
I'm going to age myself here, but it's been a very long time since I last applied for an internship. And I don't think I've ever recruited for an internship role. So this one's a little trickier for me to answer, actually. I think like the big difference between applying for an internship versus applying for like a full-time role is companies would probably look more at your cross-functional collaboration. So how you, like, even if you haven't worked with engineers or product managers before, companies would probably want to get a sense of how you would work with them if you were to break into if you were to start at the role. And then the other one is probably expect a longer interview process. So come prepared for potentially, well, definitely a portfolio presentation, potentially a case review or a case challenge, and be prepared to have a couple of conversations with a lot of different people in the organization.
Yes, totally. That makes sense. Being able to work with content writers or researchers or developers is definitely key into being a designer. Awesome. Kate, I would love to hear your thoughts.
So when I was looking for internships, it wasn't too long ago, just because I graduated this year. But I had already been working at some part-time jobs at startups before I completed my last internship at school. And then in my final year, I was applying to a lot of companies for both internships and full-time positions. And because of those part-time roles, because those roles didn't really require a technical challenge at the time, I kind of pressured myself to prepare a lot for the interview process specifically. So it was a lot of like mock practice for technical challenges, things like whiteboard challenges and take-home challenges as well. I practiced for those. Yeah, I think that usually the process for me when recruiting, or specifically the interview process, was that it started with some conversational or behavioral interviews. And then it usually consisted of that technical challenge, as I mentioned. For my last internship at Spotify, it was a little bit different. They skipped the initial like recruiter phone call, so I went straight into a behavioral interview with a design manager, and then I was given a 24-hour take-home challenge. And as for the new grad role recruiting process, my process was a bit different because I never applied to new grad roles. I converted from my internship, so it was a whole different like set of expectations there. We weren't required to do a technical challenge, but it was all just conversational to try to understand how I work with other people.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. Lorena, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, I'd never really applied to like any formal, I guess, internship routes. I mostly applied for internships at startups where I could wear a lot of hats. That was really interesting to me in any kind of role that I picked, where I could dabble in some engineering experience and design experience and some PM experience. So I think if you're looking for an internship and still trying to figure out what you wanted to do, which is what I was trying to figure out, I would just try to find roles where you can dabble in more than one thing. In terms of the actual recruitment processes, kind of what Jason said, which is that new grad roles take a lot more time. They have a lot more rounds, and each round might be very specific or looking for specific things, whereas in internship interviews that I've had, there would be less and they would be looking for a lot more at this one time. And I think with like portfolio presentations that they might ask, what I did was I had a templated kind of portfolio presentation that I would modify based on the job description, so that I had a different one for every job that I was applying to, in case during any like stage, like whether that was with the recruiter or in early stages of the interview, if they were asking specific things or it seemed like they were interested in any particular previous experience I had, I would incorporate that into my portfolio presentation with them.
Thanks. That's really good feedback. It's really good to relate the projects that you're presenting, the company that you're interviewing for. And Sharon, last but not least, would love to hear about your recruiting journey.
Yeah, applying for jobs just sucks in general. I mean, it's stressful, it's time consuming, it's almost like a job in itself. But for me, I feel like in the beginning, my biggest mistake would be like doing mass applications without, with like a single resume and a single cover letter, and not really catering any of my resumes towards the positions I'm applying for. Yeah, so I think that would be a huge tip. And also just take advantage of the fact that you're a student. You have all these design communities around you, you have student teams around you, clubs, and labs, and all of these like research opportunities or design opportunities that you can take on. And these could be like a huge step into kind of creating those passion projects or projects for a portfolio.
Yeah, so that's really good advice. Passion projects are really key, especially if you don't have a lot of experience to start with. Awesome. So thanks for sharing, everyone. The next thing I want to talk about was, what's a piece of advice related to design that you think is not talked about enough in the industry? I'll give a couple minutes to think about that. Awesome. And if anyone has anything, Jennifer, you look like you have something.
I do. I feel like this one's pretty important. It's communication and storytelling during presentations. I feel like this was something that I didn't really realize until I was doing a lot of interviews after a design challenge. You really do need to cater and understand how to share what you created to the people that you're showing it to. Like, I think that you need to really practice kind of communicating and making sure that someone who doesn't know what you're working on understands why you're solving this problem, what the problem even is, and why did you come to this kind of conclusion of a solution. I think that this is something that I didn't really realize, and it's not really talked about, but definitely storytelling during presentations is really important.
Awesome. Awesome advice, Jennifer. Thank you.
I think that something that's really important is to think about what your principles are as a designer. And this is something that you can bring up in your cover letter, even in your portfolio presentation or case studies. Basically, it's like establishing what your unique value proposition is as a designer. And this really helps to set you apart, especially when you're going for those new grad roles. So for example, for myself, I'm really passionate about things related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And so I talk about that in my portfolio pieces. I talk about how that influences my design process. And it's not something that every designer necessarily is super passionate about. Not that that's a bad thing. We all have different things that we really care about. And so however you can bring those into how you present yourself is really great for setting yourself apart.
Yeah, Alex, that's really good advice. And especially if you're from a different background, leveraging that experience into your design work is definitely key. Awesome. Does anyone else have anything? If not, we can move on to the next question. So what is the biggest portfolio mistake you've seen from student designers?
I can jump in for this one. I think it's really important to be clear, like in the first section of your case study or the first couple of slides, however you're presenting it, be clear about what the problem is and how you're solving it. For myself, if I don't see that within the first like 30 seconds of a portfolio case study, I'm probably going to lose interest because it shows, similar to what Jennifer was saying before, it shows that you're not necessarily constructing a strong narrative. And so I think that's something that's really important to focus on.
Totally agree. Does anyone else have anything, or I can pick?
I can go. Oh, sorry, Jennifer. I
You can
think
go. I'm gonna get a charger.
Okay, sweet. Yeah, I think less about a mistake, but more just like tips for starting out when making a portfolio is that something is better than having nothing there. Like I think, especially earlier in like first and second year, I had no idea how to write a portfolio, no idea how to write a case study or present my work. But I think having things on your portfolio or on your site is a good place to start. And there are so many like really great resources to figure out how to cut down your case study, what parts are important to highlight. And you can do that once you have that content, and just making sure that you're working on projects and putting that there is a good sign that you're trying to grow as a designer, and people definitely see that.
For sure. That's really good advice. Thanks, Serena.
Okay, I'll go. I guess cookie cutter portfolio case studies I've noticed is something that stands out to me. I used to do this too. I feel like just slapping on research for the sake of having research up there, or card sorting because that's a design process that you are familiar with, but it doesn't necessarily mean like you needed to do that process during that specific problem that you're solving. Really try to pick your processes based on intent and based on the problem, instead of just kind of having everything on your portfolio just to show it. It just seems like you kind of just looked it up and then just followed like a template, when you're solving for something, it's really about problem solving, and you have to find like the tools that you actually need to kind of piece up a solution. So that's a big one for me, I would say.
To piggyback off of Jennifer's point here, I think there's a way to tell if you've done your case study and you did like your design artifacts after the design is actually done. Like there's a way to sniff it out. Like I can like look at a person's portfolio, look at like these personas that they come up with, and you could just tell that like they did this after the fact, as a way to buffen up the case study. So don't do that. And then the other one is ending the case study too early. And what I mean by that is like ending the case study at the point where the design is complete. I think something that I always look out for is what's next. How are you measuring success? What are some things that you might have sacrificed in the MVP that you would like to further iterate on? Thinking about the next steps after the first version of the design deliverables and writing that out as part of your case study is always very important.
Thanks, Jason and Jennifer. Yeah, totally. That's really good feedback. For sure, making sure you're saying key takeaways, what you've learned. The reflection part is just as important as the design part. Cool. Does anyone else have anything to share? If not, I can move on to Kate.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on what Jennifer was talking about. I guess a common mistake that I see in portfolios that I also made as well is a lack of narrative in the work. Like we were just talking about, a lot of portfolios are really keen on showing this perfect design process and the results of that perfect design process. And so a lot of people don't really illustrate the thought behind each decision. And because storytelling is such a critical skill, like recruiters actually want to hear the journey of how you came to your decision and how you came to each step of your design process. They want to see the bumps in the road, where you received like new insights and how you applied them. So just don't like list out your process, but explain the rationale behind your design decisions. Like, this is what I decided to do because of X, Y, Z, and then that informed this, and so on. And then another thing that I would recommend is, while I was polishing my portfolio to prepare for applications, I made sure that there was enough buffer time in between actually starting to apply to jobs to get them in front of as many people as possible. I sent them to peers, senior designers, design hiring managers, and that helped me make sure that my portfolio could actually be easily navigated and that my articulation was strong enough for people to look at it. So yeah, just don't like sit in your room by yourself and tweak your portfolio for hours without letting it see the light of day. I definitely know what that's like. Treat it like a UX project, kind of. Get feedback on it quickly, test, and then iterate on it.
That's really good feedback. Thanks, Kate. I definitely agree with making sure that you're showing your iterations throughout your design process and then linking research back into those design changes. Awesome. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to know about from all of you is, how can students looking to break into the industry stand out as a job applicant? I haven't heard from Sharon in a bit, so, oh, I'm muted. Awesome.
Yeah, so I'd say, like, I mean, when I first started out in UX, I had a ton of experience in things like marketing and content creation and stuff like that, that might have not completely been, I guess, related to UX work. And I think that's actually something really important to showcase in your portfolio and not to just kind of throw that kind of work aside. I started out with a portfolio that had like 2 UX projects, and then I decided to add some graphics along with it, and then my robotics projects, my coding projects, and all of those skills add to the skill set of you as a product designer. And it kind of helps you stand out as an applicant as well when they're kind of looking at these portfolios.
So sort of related to that point as well, and I think Alex mentioned it earlier as well, is to leverage your diversity. Everyone here is studying something different, and everything that you study, there is something transferable into the world of product design. And so using my own personal experience, having studied accounting and finance in school, the narrative that I was telling new recruiters is, hey, I might not have studied design in school, but I'm really, really numbers driven. And what that means is I can make sure that any design work that I do ties back to your business goals. And I can figure out how to measure them too, because I'm really good with numbers. And that was a really unique angle at that time for anyone looking to hire like a fresh grad out of school.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. So we have 5 more minutes left before we answer some questions in the chat. I just wanted to throw in this question because I thought it was interesting. What's one thing you guys like most about your role and one thing you guys don't enjoy as much? Okay, if everyone's muted, I'm going to pick, oh, Lorena, thank you.
Yeah, I can start with what I don't like first. And I think for me, that's just working remotely. It's pretty hard to foster real relationships, I think, when you're spending most of your time on Zoom. And I mean, I feel like Zoom fatigue is real and being on all the time. Whereas that might be different if you're working with people and sitting next to them every day. And in terms of what I love most about my role, I really think that I just enjoy working with the people on my team and getting to be in an environment where I'm given the space to learn and grow, both as a designer and as a person. I think that's super rare, and hopefully everyone here is working on a team where they really enjoy the people they're working with and are growing and are supported. And I think maybe that's something that's not talked about a lot in the industry, like finding a product that you really enjoy and people that you like working with.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Team is so important, and how you work with your team. And the work from home thing is definitely can be hard sometimes because you're not able to collaborate directly or get feedback right away. Awesome. Is anyone else? Alex?
I'll start off with the thing that I don't enjoy as much, and this isn't specific to my role. I think it's just the industry we're in. Tech moves so fast and product design moves so fast, and sometimes there's just a lot of pressure to kind of keep up with what's going on in the industry. So like what I've started doing is just trying to find more fun ways to learn about my own, within health tech space, but also just about product design in general. Because it does kind of feel like you're always kind of playing catch up. Like everything is like Twitter and you're just kind of reading through the feed all the time. Specifically about the role that I'm in, I just really love getting to work cross-functionally to solve the problems that we're working on and getting to work with people that are really curious about how to design the best solutions. And something that I really like, I don't think it's unique to startups, but just within product design is you get to think about strategy from like a micro lens, from a macro lens, and you get to really figure that out and how it works into the designs that you're doing. And that's super satisfying to do.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. Okay. Would love to hear Jennifer's thoughts on this question.
Okay, so for me, I guess having a really supportive team and a supportive manager, as well as having the autonomy to do your work without kind of having someone always nitpicking every step of the way, because sometimes you do need to have those iterations and it's not perfect, but just having it out there and just knowing that you can always go to the team to kind of get feedback on. I think that's something that I really do enjoy. For me, what I don't enjoy as much, I would say I'm working on a lot of projects at once right now, and I would prefer kind of having more ownership over maybe one project instead of multiple ones, because it can get really busy. But other than that, I think it was just that time being, it was just a lot. But other than that, it's been good.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. I have time for one more. Does anyone want to share things they love most about their role and versus things they don't enjoy as much?
So for me, it's the autonomy to make like major product decisions as a core team without having to go through many layers of approval. Like within my pod, every day we have the ability to make product decisions that can, lead to hundreds, millions of dollars more revenue for the company, and in turn generate millions of dollars in market cap for the company. Like the impact is, from a financial perspective, is huge. And for a company to be able to put that power within their pods, within small teams, is very unique. And it's something that I really love about the current role. Something that I don't enjoy as much, I don't know, I'm still in the honeymoon phase for this company. So everything is great. I love my role. Ask me again in a month, maybe.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jason. Okay, so we are going to move on to some questions in the chat. Thank you all for answering the questions so far. It's really great to hear your experience. So the first question is actually to Jason. What was the first startup you made during college and how did you get it started?
So the startup, I use the word startup a little loosely. It was just an app and we had a couple hundred users. So I think it was too early to call a startup at that time. But the story behind that was I was at an entrepreneurship conference. I was pumped, motivated, and then I ended up building an app with my roommates, who just so happened to be, there was a business guy, there was a developer, and there was no designer. So I was like, I'll go be the designer. And then we ended up working on that for 3 years while we were in school. The idea was, if you look at like the address book on your phone, it's very like static, meaning like if someone else updates their phone number, your phone doesn't know that information. And so we were really trying to solve that information of the address book, and like, how do we like create complete pictures of everyone's social identity, so that like if I were to change my phone number, it updates on all of my friends' address books. If I were to sign up for Instagram, like everyone would, all of my friends in my address book would know that I'm on Instagram, which was a big idea at the time. Now hearing myself explain it, like I feel like it's been done many times already.
Hey, I still have my friends posting on their stories of their new numbers, so I don't think it's a bad idea at all. Awesome. So the second question is there a specific prototyping program preferred when starting out? Figma, Adobe XD, Sketch, doesn't matter which one you start with. Does anyone want to take this one?
I'd say they're all pretty similar. Like once you learn one, it's not hard to learn the others. But right now, an industry favorite for sure is Figma. I know that a lot of projects in my consulting company is literally just to completely change the design system or move the design system from Sketch onto Figma. So that is something that we're looking into in the future for a shift in product design.
Yep, totally agree with that. I was a Sketch fan, but I had to move to Figma, and it's just a lot better because of the collaboration. Anyone else? Does anyone not like Figma? Lorena, you unmuted. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think any of them are great to start out with. I would also suggest familiarizing yourself with all of them. Depending on the company that you end up working for, they might be using one over the other and have their own reasons, and it might be very difficult to convince them to switch, or they may have their reasons for picking one, and just testing them out and figuring out how to use them, even in the most basic way, and having that experience to put on your CV is a huge highlight, I think.
Awesome. Yeah, I know at my company, some teams use Sketch still and some teams use Figma for sure. All right. So I will jump into the third question. For those who converted from an internship to full-time role, so Kate, what factors helped you decide that you wanted to continue working at the company versus pursuing another opportunity?
All right, was this question for me?
It's for anyone that's converted from an internship to a full-time role.
Okay, I can start. I think the main reason that I wanted to stay at my company after my internship was that I really love that at Spotify, there's a huge emphasis in being forward-thinking and being experimental and open to failure. And as a junior designer and a student at the time, I remember it felt really daunting to be joining this new company and being like the most inexperienced person there. But my entire team were all so supportive of me, even when I felt like my work wasn't perfect or I wasn't really happy with how things turned out and I was being really precious with my work. I was able to essentially identify learning moments from each and every project that I did. So I love that they pushed me to grow immensely and also kind of encouraged me to be less afraid of imperfection. So that to me was an indicator that I could really grow at this company and that I was welcomed as a designer, that I could feel comfortable growing at this company. So yeah, I guess that would be the main reason that I wanted to stay after my internship.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Kate. And was there anything that you did to make yourself stand out to be considered for full-time? Or if there's any tips that you have for those that have landed an internship and want to secure a full-time?
Well, I can start with saying that I kind of went into the internship wanting a full-time conversion offer because I was in my last year of school. And I really wanted to have like a full-time job offer lined up after I was finished with school. So one thing that I tried to do was to be really, really proactive with my growths and take ownership of it. And in order to be successful in the conversion process, you need to be proactive in setting up like regular one-on-one meetings with your manager so that you can ask for and receive feedback on your performance all the time. And then also like share project updates, discuss initiatives that you want to invest in, that you want to grow in. And I would just say, like, ask your manager early on about what success looks like, how they prefer to be communicated with, and set up those recurring one-on-one check-ins, as I said, so that you look like somebody that is really, really passionate about the role and that you would do really well in a full-time role as well.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Kate. So the next question is how to portray a non-UX related work experience. It may sound as a shortcoming in the interviews.
I don't think that there's really, like, I think that there's always a way that you can link it back to the responsibilities that you'll have in your role. Like prior to working in UX, I've done everything from like physical fabrication, like welding metal together, to like, working in retail. And there's always elements of that you can link back to whatever you're doing. I think it's more important to think about how close the experience is time-wise to the role that you're applying to. So if it's something that is non-UX related work from like 5 years ago versus non-UX related work from a year ago, talk about the one that's more recent, because that's going to be more relevant and it's going to show also your skills and progression and your growth.
Yeah. Continue.
I would also, just adding to what Alex said, look at whether or not that's important to portray. Like you can consider putting that maybe at the end of your portfolio, or just leaving it out and having maybe a link to it as opposed to explaining it. But again, it really depends on time. If this is something that's very recent and maybe a project that you worked on right before this new role that you're looking for, you can definitely try to spin it and give an angle where it relates, or maybe you could like work on a project after that to kind of relate the two. I think there are a lot of different ways, but I also wouldn't worry too much about showcasing work outside of UX.
Yeah, I agree with those points. And if it's a project that you're interested in, you can always try to make a case study out of it and make your own UX project out of it. So the last question I have here is, from a recruiter's perspective, would you rather see a candidate's personal project over a group industry project? I think this is a good question because I get asked this a lot.
I can also answer this one. I think it would depend on the amount of work that you did on an industry-specific project. And you can just highlight the sections that you did and make sure that you mention which parts that you didn't but were important in the case study. It's nice to talk about industry projects because they might already be in public or in use, and you can talk about that impact. I think personal projects are important if you're trying to showcase work that wasn't done in an industry project, or something that has a very full breadth that you can show from like exploratory to like final conception.
That's really good advice. Does anyone else want to share their thoughts?
I think go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Jason.
Thank you. So not directly answering the question, but a piece of advice that I really like to give to grads, if you just graduated and you don't have anything in your portfolio piece, is to look at a product that you use, a digital product, and critique it, and critique it from the perspective not of just like, oh, it looks bad, so this is how I'm going to make it look better, but thinking about it from a business perspective. Think about like why the team decided to launch a product in the way that it has been launched versus your critique, and write all of that out. And I think that you can create a lot of really, really good case studies on your own simply through app critique. That's really actually like how I was able to build my portfolio out of nothing, is simply by writing app critiques and designing it and writing blog posts. I think a lot of new designers don't write enough, and writing is a skill that can get you really, really far.
Totally makes sense. Storytelling is key. And Alex, did you want to add any further thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you don't necessarily have the space in your portfolio, but you want to create the opportunity to bring up a personal project, if you have space on your resume, that's also a great place to mention it. It gives you that entry point in an interview to kind of talk about the project. And it might not necessarily take up space in the portfolio if you have like a file size limitation or amount of case studies that you want to show or something like that.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all the time we have today, but thank you so much everyone for attending, and thank you to our panelists for giving such great feedback. Yeah, I'll pass it off to Justin.